Welcome to Your Business Success Podcast with your host, Hiru Chothia, where she and her guests explore strategies of how to gain business mastery through growing your revenue as well as your personal time in order to develop a strong and sustainable business.
Well, hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to another episode of the Business Growth Mastery Show, where we bring to you 6, 7, and 8-figure entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and subject matter experts to share their breakthroughs, their challenges, their strategies, as well as their successes, so that you too can learn from them and, more importantly, emulate them to succeed in your own business. I'm absolutely delighted to have with us today Robbie Samuels, who has been recognized as a networking expert by Inc. and Lifehacker. He is the author of the new best-selling business book, Croissants versus Bagels: Strategic, Effective, and Inclusive Networking at Conferences, and has also been profiled in Standout: How to Find Your Breakthrough Idea and Build a Following Around It by Dorie Clark. As a coach and author and speaker, he shifts mindsets so that his clients become more strategic, effective, and inclusive when networking, and develop a more diverse and vibrant professional network that leads to new business opportunities, which is what we're about to explore with him in a great more detail today. Robbie is a professional member of the National Speakers Association, and a common thread through all of his talks is inclusive relationship building, whether through networking, fundraising, sales, or diversity and inclusion. And I'm sure you'll agree that inclusive relationship building is a trait that we all want to be strong at. Yeah. So without further ado, let's meet him. Welcome, Robbie. A very, very warm welcome, and great to have you on the show.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me here.
Oh, good to have you here. So, Robbie, before we launch into all the questions that I have for you, I want to create some context here for the listeners. Those in my community will be familiar that there are 3 key pillars that I advocate in terms of success in business, namely the right mindset, strong systems and processes, and taking timely and concerted actions. So I'm delighted that your new book, Croissants versus Bagels, I should say, covers all 3 concepts in some shape or form, which we'll be exploring today in this episode. So let's start with you, Robbie, by telling us a little bit and sharing with us, what was the impetus for you writing this new book, Croissants versus Bagels? And perhaps you'll then go on to explain this wonderful title that I absolutely love as well.
So I'll start with the title explanation, just so your listeners aren't on the edge of their seat any longer. So if you're at a networking event, you'll see people standing in these tight networking circles, these shoulder-to-shoulder huddles that are impossible to break into. Those are the bagels. And if one person in that circle opens up their body language and makes space for others to join, that's the croissant. And that simple little metaphor, right? You'll whenever you walk into a room, you're not sure where to go, you can use that to kind of help guide you. I was led to write this book after speaking on the topic of inclusive networking for the last nearly 10 years. I started speaking professionally in 2009, and I actually probably developed the topic a year and a half prior to that. And I was running a social justice meetup group called Socializing for Justice. It just closed after 11 years. And about a year in, we brought our regulars out for coffee to talk to them about the culture of the space we were creating together and to invite them to play a bigger role in that. And we said, can you come 15 minutes early? And they said, oh, of course. I said, okay, because, usually the most awkward newcomer comes right, early, and they don't know where to go, who to talk to. And I'm busy, hanging signs. And they said, okay, no problem. Can you help out at the front door with name tags? Sure. And then I said, and then just work the room, mingle. And that's when they started to stare at me with sort of a deer in headlights look, because they skewed as a group of about 17 of them towards being shy and or introverted. And so it was not in their natural comfort zone to quote, work a room. So I started doing a little one-on-one coaching and collaborated with someone to design what ultimately became a topic that I'm now doing for that 10-year period called Art of the Schmooze. And I also have a podcast called On the Schmooze. So it's kind of I talk about these concepts all the time. And so after years of doing this, I finally, got out of my own way and wrote the book, right? Because that's so important. And now what I love is that people like you get to hear it. Now your listeners are hearing about it. And I do think these concepts are applicable to a range of situations, and we can dive into what those might be. But that was the impetus. I'm a professional speaker, and you need a book. And I was glad to finally to have crafted that one.
Well, we're delighted because I've read it, and I urge all of you to go and read it because it's got some wonderful insights in there about how we can really perfect our networking skills, whether we are new to networking or indeed whether we're quite entrenched in the whole process of networking. And if you are, you may feel that you've really seen it all, done it all, but here are some wonderful strategies of how you can improve your networking impact on a daily basis. And not just networking. I just wanted to say that actually a lot of what Robbie is advocating in his book is just as applicable to, as you say, networking events, but also at conferences, at meetings, on a daily personal relationship building activity. So a lot of what you say in your book is going to be very useful on many levels. So now let's get into the book itself and what you've suggested. As I said at the start, you cover 3 specific aspects of being strategic, being effective, and being inclusive. So let's start with the strategic aspects. And in this context, just again, drawing back to what I said earlier about the 3 pillars, this is very much, as I've understood it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is very much around the mindset piece that I was talking about earlier. So share with us what you think is important and why you think it's important to be strategic and why mindset matters so much in this context.
I appreciate that question. And just to kind of add on to what you said a moment ago about how this applies everywhere, I use the word networking as a sort of a simple way of explaining what I offer, what I teach and coach on. But it's really, I've come to understand that it's actually a mindset shift that helps you realize and recognize and act on the opportunities, possibilities, and connections that are available to you every day in the world around you. Absolutely. And to me, that is how I network. To me, that is, I network when I'm at a Starbucks waiting in line for coffee. I network when I'm, at the grocery store. To me, it's about having conversations. And when you meet interesting people, having the wherewithal and the systems in place to do the follow-up. So I chose to focus the book on conferences because specifically it's a space that a lot of us do put energy and time and money into. And so there's a sunk cost to going to a conference. Even if someone else is paying your way, there's still time away from the office and from home and the travel, et cetera. So I want people to maximize the ROI, the return on their investment, and going to the space like that. But once you acquire these skills and they become part of your life, I think it's hard to turn it off. So that goes back to your point about strategy. I have mastermind clients that I work with, and we just wrapped up one a moment ago and last night. And so it's amazing how in a short 10-week period, one of my clients was saying, she now just sort of sees things differently. And she was at actually a food bank volunteering and walked away with 3 connections that were people that she wanted to stay in touch with. Yeah. And she said other times I would have gone there, volunteered, minded my own business. But for her, what happened was she was standing there chopping onions and kept thinking, ask about them, ask about them. They want to share who they are. Ask about them. And she finally started to ask about the other people who were there volunteering with her. And they ended up being a very interesting group of people that she had an opportunity to meet. And so to me, that's not really any different to what I advocate happening in the conference setting. It's just you have to sort of be aware of and open to the possibilities and then have, like I said, the systems and wherewithal to actually act on them. So the mindset is important because a lot of us do show up at these spaces, whether it's a networking event, it could be a chamber of commerce kind of event or a conference. We arrive logistically, but we haven't really done the work to know why we're going. And we get to the end of the meeting or the end of a weekend and, we're a little tired. especially if we're introverted. And, even as an extrovert, like I might be like energized from seeing a lot of people, but still feel like, was that a waste of my time? I don't know. Did I meet the right people? I think a lot of it is on us prior to going. And what I promise my more introverted clients is if you do the pre-work, you can spend 1 hour at a networking event and accomplish your goals and then choose to stay or not. You'll leave knowing you've done what you need to do there, and that you'll do the follow-up as well. So it won't be a waste of your time. So it's just, I think mindset's like, it's just so funny. Like, I don't want to say that serendipity isn't important, but I actually think serendipity is more likely when you know what you're looking for. And that's part of strategy. Like strategy is having an awareness of what you might be looking for, and then serendipity suddenly appears.
Okay, I agree with you to a certain extent. I'm just thinking, there may be people sitting there thinking, that's all very well, but I've had some negative experiences at networking, and I really don't want to go anymore, or I go with complete dread. So how do they get away from that negativity?
So there was actually a study that Harvard University, Northwestern University, and I think one other college put together that actually tied networking to people feeling dirty.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because that was true for people who were still climbing their career ladder and who were going to these events looking for something. They were very much in need, and that was how they were defining their reason for going. But if you were more senior, the executives, the C-suite, they don't feel that way towards networking, because when they go to a space, they know they're there also to offer something. And so the way around this is for you to reframe this to not be what's in it for me, but what can I offer? And the offers and the way of sharing value is like wide ranging. It's about being really inventive. So one of my clients recently met someone that, she's been trying to get on his radar for a long time. They've known of each other for a while. She's now starting to see him professionally on a regular basis in a certain setting, but she's still not quite on his radar. And I said, well, what is his interest in going to that meeting? And she said, oh, he's looking for placements for interns. He works at a college. I said, well, okay, well, do you know places that would be interested in his students? Could you help make some introductions? Could you ask him for what's the kind of placement you're looking for? Could you share with some information to me, and I'll keep an eye out, and then actually share a couple of leads? Do you think that would get you on his radar? She's like, oh my gosh, of course he would very much be happy to have that. I'm like, well, do you think he'd then stay after and talk to you after one of these meetings and like learn about more of what you're looking for? And she was like, well, I can't see why not. so it just
so obvious.
Right. So it just went from, I don't think I can get on this guy's calendar, to a clear step-by-step way to doing it. And that's when she was really clear about what she wanted. I also advocate doing things without it being transactional at all. Like, so another client was in China, saw a book in a gift shop, reminded her of a colleague she hasn't seen in a long time, who she's really fond of and wanted to reconnect with. She would have just walked past it. She thought, what would Robbie do? She picked up the book, bought it, brought it home, inscribed it, mailed it to him, got a lovely response back. And now they're started to think about how they can continue to chat with each other. He's making introductions on her behalf, right? And it wasn't like she reached out with an agenda item. But what I think about networking in relation to building is, if there are people in your past that you've worked with in some capacity that you've always enjoyed, and you've lost touch because that's what happens. You change jobs, change careers, change industries. Why not find ways to rekindle those connections? You don't have to have a reason for it if you genuinely like these people. Yeah. And that's how I recently launched a book, and the people who were the fastest to write a review as part of my launch team were people I had presented in front of years ago. And the people who were slowest were actually my closest friends and family. Because it's just different.
Typical.
Yeah. And it makes sense. Like, the person I presented in front of got a lot of value out of what I'm offering, and they're truly excited about this book. If I had not thought to reach out to them, though, because they were a distant connection, then that would have been a missed opportunity, because now they're super excited to be back in touch with me. They're excited about the resource, and so actually my my subject line back to these people from years ago was, do you remember croissants versus bagels? And then I said, hey, it's a book now. It's a concept that they've never forgotten. And they were like,
think anyone will.
Yeah, they're like, it's a book now. It's like, so don't feel negative about the possibility of who you might reach out to. But I think, just to your question, the way to get out of your own way around networking is to really do that pre-work. to understand the value of what's happening in that space. And I will also tell you, I'm an outgoing extrovert, and I'm going to tell you, do not go to everything. Just do not go to everything. I think some people are burning themselves out, and they're not leaving time in between to even do the follow-up. So that's part of it. You've got to be more strategic about that. And I'll give you one particular tip around this, which is you can invest time in a high intensity way in a short amount of time with an organization that hosts, maybe they host a monthly event. The 3 months in a row you go, you're very present, you're very active. You get there early, you stay late, you participate actively, you lead when you can, you say yes to being on a panel, where you do whatever you have to do to be really visibly there and like connect to the people. Then maybe you miss the next 2 or 3 ones, and you pop up a few more times the rest of the year, but they're going to remember you. Versus if you go to 3 or 4 in a year and they're really scattered, no traction.
No one knows you.
No one knows you, and you're not a regular. So you have to go to a short enough amount of time in a high intensity kind of way so that you do establish yourself as a regular, but you do not have to go every single month to that meeting in order to stay connected, because hopefully in those 3 months you have become, LinkedIn or Facebook connections with some of the people in the room. You've formed sidebar conversations that will be nurtured throughout the year, and that you don't need to rely on going in person to every single meeting. So which allows you to then have that same intensity for a different organization's events for another quarter of the year. So without burning yourself out, you could nurture like multiple communities and be present when needed and show up when asked, the rest of the year. But the reason they're even think to ask you is because you were there. I think people do too much of a scattershot approach to networking. And that's part of why they feel negative about it, is it's not actually meeting their needs. It's not resulting in the kind of connections that they're hoping it could happen.
And that scatter approach means that it's failing to plan, really, in what you want to go to. I mean, a lot of people, and I include myself in this, I'm sometimes drawn into these networking events. Something pops up in an email, and I think, oh, that could be quite interesting. And, without giving it the strategic element of your planning process of thinking about where does this fit into my span of work, what will I benefit from if I attend this, is this an add-on and an effective way of me adding on to something that I already have planned in my diary? And how many networking events have I planned this year in my diary, if I've planned them at all, So I think there's a lot in what you've said there. So to unpick that, so how can, and that's moved us really nicely, because you've talked very much about having the right mindset, first of all, of being in the right mindset so that you are moving from a transactional approach into something that is much more about an offer, if I've heard you right. And now let's talk about, so you're now thinking, okay, I might be able to get over my negativity. I might go, I might present myself at this networking event. I've already touched upon the fact of planning, and you might want to say some more about that, because I know your book covers some issues around what's appropriate in terms of planning. But how can we be effective when we're there? So before we get there and then at the
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it's about asking yourself a series of questions. Why this event? Like just even stopping to ask yourself that, even if someone else told you should go, you should still understand it for yourself. If you do know people who've been to it, ask them if you can get a sense of why they go and whether they think what your goals are would also be beneficial. You should be thinking about who you want to meet and what you're hoping to learn and what inspiration you're looking for, but also what offer you can make, what value you can offer. So I'll give you an example. Like if you're a lawyer, if you're an attorney, you want to be an attorney, the only one in that event. You want to go to spaces where there's authors and you're the attorney who works with authors, right? And that would be much more beneficial than you going to all the events where attorneys are. Yep. Now you want to have some portion of your networking relationship building to be with people in your industry. You might want to go to association meetings, that kind of thing, in order to stay current in what's going on in your topic area. But if that's the primary way you do networking, then it's probably not going to feed your business the way you want it to. So that's one of the things you have to think about, is balancing that out. But in a space where you can offer something, you'll be more memorable. So it also changes the the script in your head about what you're looking for. And just a side note, for those people who are looking for a job, realize that you're also offering something. Because if you ever had to hire, it's an exhausting process, and trying to find the right fit, it's so much work. So if you were a hiring manager and you met someone out in person who presented themselves well, seemed interested, had a good conversation with you, showed a lot of interest based on their experience and passion, and then actually followed up with a good application and cover letter, et cetera, that would just stand out so much because it's what you're looking for. And so I think people have to recognize that even when you're in need of something like a job, you're still offering something, and it's about the right fit for both parties. So really, it's so much is about mindset, but the effective part is key, because you could show up to the right event and do nothing. So, I mean, there are extremes to this. The extremes are the outgoing extroverts who run around the room, kissing hands and shaking babies, or how does it go? Kissing babies, kissing babies and shaking hands. Yeah. So I'm never going to be a politician. So, just without any sense of why they're doing it, it's the kind of people who air kiss their way through a room, but no substantive dialogue. They either spend all of their time talking to people they already know, or talk to people they don't know. Like, they're both extremes where some people are just there to collect business cards from people they don't know. And then other people are like, well, I know these 3 people. That's who I'm going to spend the entire night with. So you want to balance. Part of it is you have to be thinking about a combination of people you already know and people you are being introduced to, because that balance is going to help you nurture these relationships. And so depending on who you are, that might have a goal of, 3 new people and 3 reconnections. At a conference, for me, that might be 3 of each per day. And for a shy person, it might be 3 of each the entire 3 days. But it's okay. It's like,
but it's still 3 good connections.
Right. And it's the fact that you're being clear about it, and you're making the most of the time you have there. The other thing is, there's so many little moments at these events where you could, without even a lot of pre-planning, like, find ways to connect. And going into a conference breakout room is one of them. A lot of times, if you're a little overwhelmed by the vibrant chaos of the hallway, you might duck into the conference breakout session a little early, say even like 10 or more minutes early.
Yeah.
But what I see people do is they get in and they sit as far apart from each other as possible.
Yes.
And they get on their phone. It's like, what they fail to realize is that, they fail to realize that the people in that room chose the same conference, chose the same topic, and chose to duck out of the vibrant chaos of the hallway. So that's your people. So part of it is, I think, individually there are things we can do to engage in those spaces. There are things that the organizers can do. So I actually work with conference organizers to think about the training of the volunteers and the staff and the speakers. There's things speakers can do to facilitate that space differently. Essentially, you don't want it to be a quiet room, because then even if you and I were speaking, as we were walking into the room, we would suddenly go quiet because the room is quiet. So there's a certain amount of vibrancy that has to be happening in the room. And, of course, there's going to be some people who really don't want to be bothered. It's too early. They're working on an email for work. But a vast majority of people are just looking for someone to say hello to them. And that's a big piece of it. So I think that's a piece of being effective, is taking advantage of these opportunities. And then there's just tracking the cards, having cards with you. I mean, literally having them with you at the event at all. And then having them on your person in such a way that if your bag is on the other side of the room, you can still hand them a card. I mean, that happens so often. It's like laughable. So when we say, "Oh, I'd like to give you a card," "Oh, hold on a second, it's in my bag." And it's like the likelihood that I'm still standing here.
And you have no pockets.
Yes, and you've probably seen that I've addressed this. I have a podcast episode, "When Will Women Win the Right to Pockets?"
Yes. It did make me laugh, but I so resonated with that.
Yeah.
I have to really think hard about what I'm going to wear to a conference. Or
that's about being effective. Yeah, right?
Because I'm so sick of not having the right things in my hands, because I don't have the pockets otherwise to be able to do that. So let's just step back a bit. We've talked about being effective and being selective, but so we've chosen our few. And if we've been really selective, we've perhaps chosen the next few months. we've decided, or a whole year, we've decided these are the ones I'm going to attend in networking terms or conferences or whatever it is. And what is it that then makes us more effective? Is it just being selective, or do we have to do more than that, in your opinion?
So when I was writing the book, I was trying to decide how to arrange the topics, what are the chapters, and everyone kept saying, well, wouldn't it be before, during, and after the event? Isn't that the natural progression? And my response always was, but follow-up is something you have to pay attention to and participate in before, during, and after the event. Because follow-up, the way it starts is before you even go to the event, my suggestion, and this is what got written up in Lifehacker one of the times they mentioned me, is to write your follow-up email before you go to the event. The practice of that will kind of put you through the paces of all the questions I enumerated earlier. So that's before the event. That's about mindset, but it's also related to the follow-up. During the event, you track the cards in such a way that you can identify the priority cards. So in most countries and cultures, it's comfortable. You're okay to like turn the corner of the card. If you're listening and you're traveling to Asia, I do not recommend it. Know the local customs. Know the local culture. But, you know, in Western culture, we barely look at the card, and there it's treated with a lot of deference. So somewhere in between is what we should pay attention to what people are giving us. But, you know, you might also write a note on the card, take a picture of it with your phone and have it attached to Evernote, which links to LinkedIn. And there's so many systems you could have in place. But ultimately, you have to be able to get back home and differentiate the really priority conversations that you want to follow up with everybody else, because sometimes we're standing in those croissants, and those actually they're more like a bagel, the tight networking circles, and somebody just starts handing out their card, and then everyone's handing out their business card, and those cards should not have equal weight to the conversation you spent 20 minutes talking to someone. So, and then the last piece of follow-up is you have to actually schedule time to do it before you go to the event. So if you're going to an event on Tuesday night, you should have time scheduled on Wednesday to do this follow-up. And
very good point.
Book the time. If you've pre-written your email and you have a draft and you have a real sense of why you're going, who you want to talk to, and you have the right kinds of conversations, and you keep track of your priority business cards, and you have time set aside, the likelihood of follow through is so high, compared to what most of us do, which is we have stacks of business cards on our desk, sitting near our keyboard that we then like move to the back of the desk and we move to a drawer and we recycle them and we go out. So that cycle, I want to help people stop wasting time networking in that way. That's not helping.
No.
It's not about collecting business cards. It's actually building relationships. And, you know, and then I think there are systems for staying in touch. There's things, different tools. And I like certain things, but I'm also a little agnostic. Like I think like if index cards and a pen work for you, then do it. Like I really don't want to like oversell the idea that you have to have a fancy CRM, but no system is zero. It's like no system. And that means the card's literally just in a stack with best intentions, but nothing comes from best intentions. So that's part of like being effective, I think, is that full picture of knowing where you're going, getting excited about it, having a plan for tracking those cards, and actually doing the follow-up. And it's not just one time. That's the hard part. You know, this is what I talk to my clients about all the time. It's like sometimes you have to really nurture a relationship. Sometimes you have to get back in front of a person in person to continue making an impact. Sometimes you send little updates and resources and you do all the little nudges every month or two, and you think it's going nowhere, and then 6 months later they call you to tell you to bid on something, and the reason they thought of you is because you stayed top of mind. They never replied, but it was not for naught. It was for good that you had done all that follow-up. And I think like we can get in our heads and just stop prematurely from making those efforts.
Yeah, and like anything in business, often there are very long lead-in times, and you've got to work and build that relationship and sort of nurture it in order to get the response that you're looking for. And often it'll come, as you say, sometimes in quite an unexpected time, and often much later than in terms of when you first made that connection. So having that patience and being able to follow up.
Right.
In everything you do in business. And this is just another one of those crucial moments where you have to do that. So you touched upon something that is an absolute bugbear of mine, which is the thrusting of business cards, those lesson networking events. And so that brings us very nicely on to sort of what is determined to be etiquette, appropriate etiquette in a networking sort of scenario or a conference scenario. Less so, I guess, in a business meeting, but maybe even when we first arrive at a business meeting, a group of people we've never met. What is the etiquette in your opinion, in terms of those business cards, etc.?
Well, one, I still like having them. I love technology and I use it. I love productivity tools, but I actually still like the paper. It's a reminder to do something when I take it home when I take someone else's card home. That physical reminder is very helpful. It's also branded. It helps me remember who they are when I see the logo in their business. I can read the tagline and their title, and it's just helpful to kind of imprint them a little bit in my brain. I can write
the message.
Yeah, I can write a little note in the back so I understand why exactly. If you have a good system, you can do things like take pictures and write notes to yourself, but you have to be the kind of person who's really consistent with that, or else it's like pictures that go nowhere. So the problem is there's no reminder to do something. It's purely digital. But I think that the moment to hand out your card is not when you first meet someone. And I think that's the mistake. And the same thing with like your pitch or your, the who are you message, the elevator pitch kind of thing. I think too often people are saying it while they're still shaking hands, and they're like trapping this person in a handshake that goes on for like the entire length of this pitch, and you don't even know if this person cares. Like at that point they probably don't, because now they're tuning out. So I think that we need to really rethink what the original approach is. For me, it comes down to really basics. It's like, hi, my name's Robbie, and your listeners should use their own first names, but like
that could make it more interesting.
Yeah, it's like, it's not going to work probably unless you are Robbie. But like, hi, my name's Robbie, and like, you don't overthink it. You might say your affiliation, and that's it, and then you let the conversation present itself. So Dale Carnegie said this piece so succinctly. He said, "To be interesting, be interested." And I say, how to leave people thinking you're fascinating. It's the same concept. So if you just introduced yourself in the way I just mentioned, and then you asked someone a thoughtful, open-ended question that wasn't, what do you do for work, or anything along those lines, but got them to share a little bit about themselves, and they showed up a little bit, and you showed a little, genuine interest. And my line for what to say when I don't know what to say, because that happens, people bring up topics I know nothing about. Really, that is so interesting. Tell me more. And and then they do. And then a few minutes later, I might think, well, this is really not going where I think it would go. So I excuse myself and I tell them, wow, I shake their hand. I say, it was really nice meeting you. Thank you so much for the conversation. And I go. And they think I'm fascinating. And then later on, they're standing in one of those bagels and they spot me and they turn instinctively to make space for me. And they introduce me to their colleague and then say, oh, actually, Robbie, I don't know much about you. What brings you here? And there's my chance to say a little bit about me, right? And so if you're walking up to these bagels and people are getting tighter instead of opening up to you, then you're the person who probably is being a little too forward, a little too pushy in the beginning of a conversation, not giving people an opportunity to like be sharing more of themselves. And I actually eschew, I dislike the what do you do question, because it's a rote response. Like it's like asking about the weather. It's like there are certain things we're all going to say, and then it doesn't necessarily lead anywhere. So
it doesn't go anywhere. It's a sort of conversation stopper, isn't it, in a way?
Yeah. So what I actually coach people to do is to come up with an answer to that question. So first, don't use the question yourself. Find other things to say, but answer the question differently. So instead of just saying that your title and your job, like answer it in this is the syntax. It's like, I help blank do blank, or like I inspire blank to do blank, or my work doing blank makes this other thing possible. And even if you're doing like the database management of a company, like you can still find ways to describe your work that's interesting. If you're a lawyer, you're a consultant, no matter what you do, it's talk about the mission of the work that you do. Talk about the needs that you meet, the people you serve, the customers that are impacted when your job is done well. And then be prepared with one or two really brief, quick stories that highlight that kind of impact. So that, people then say, oh, how do you do that? And then you say, well, let me tell you an example. And the thing is, stories light up the recipient's brain, the entire brain, and they absorb it differently than facts and figures. So use it to your advantage. And right away, here you are a few minutes in, and you're having a conversation. And it's even though you're talking about you're sharing in a way that lets them be part of it. And eventually the thing you're there to talk about will come up, or it won't. Honestly, sometimes, like in that first few minutes, it may not. And I used to teach, my background's fundraising, so I also teach fundraising, but I was doing major gifts and running events for 10 years, 25 events a year. And, you would never walk into an event and expect to walk out with a $5,000 check from someone you've never met. So I just don't understand, like, why in business we think that we're going to meet someone and seal a deal. It just does not happen that way. That's why you have to continue to connect and reconnect with people. Yeah,
absolutely. So I like your and I know I read in the book with great humor the exiting with grace. I wondered if you could just expand on that, because I was so touched, and as I say, it was so funny. I had to stop. Actually, I was outside when I was reading it, and I had to stop because I was getting some strange looks as I was guffawing with laughter on this point of your exiting with grace. So do share with the listeners.
Wow, I had not thought of that particular section as being so humorous, but I can see now why you thought so. So graceful exit strategies. Well, the number one thing I think I start with is, if you leave while the group is still a large group, it's really simple to walk away. You're not going to stop the conversation and shake hands with the other 4 people in your circle, right? You would just tap the person next to you and say, hey, I'm going to go blah, 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 blah. And you would just walk off. And it's totally social etiquette. That's fine.
And acceptable.
Totally acceptable, And in fact, for you to interrupt to making a pronouncement would be considered not quite right. Like, why are you interrupting the flow of our conversation to announce you're going to go get a drink? Just go. See ya. Now, if there's 3 people, you have to make a decision, because if someone other than you leaves, then there's only 2 of you, and that is the one where you have to negotiate the most. So that's where you decide, are you going to go? Are you going to invite other people in? Right? Consider your body language. Make sure that people can join you. But also, like, just think about, is the conversation ready to end? Like, in some ways, you need to be thinking about ending before it's time. I think that's the part that most people forget, is that if you want to leave people on a high note, like, if the point of this conversation is actually to leave people thinking well of you, then you have to leave them wanting to say more.
Absolutely.
So wanting to talk to you further. And if you've gotten to the point in the conversation where you're both sort of shuffling your feet, awkwardly trying to figure out how to get out, you've missed that moment, like far missed. And by the way, still, you should just go, because you're not making any better choices by staying.
Need to go.
Definitely need to go. But sometimes you have to think, oh, this has been so great. I probably should go. It's like just a little bell in your head. And then lastly, if you end up with just the 2 of you, it comes down to 3 G's: grip, grin, and go. And there's the handshake, right? Historically, do you know where it comes historically, the handshake?
No.
It means I have no weapon.
Oh.
From the days of swords. Yeah. And now it means I have no iPhone. So anyway, so you shake hands. And that's the bookend to when you shook hands at the very beginning of the conversation. That means something. That's a social cue. And then the grin, right? It's grip, grin, and go. The grin is not just that you smile, but it's you say something nice. And it kind of smooths this out. Now, I had someone once shake my hand and say, I'm going to get a drink, and walk off. And I was like so taken aback. And I realized that it felt very abrupt. And that if he had just said, like, great seeing you here, all those little niceties, that's all it is, but it would have smoothed it out. And the last thing is you have to go. And it seems so obvious, but so many people who get stuck in conversations, they interrupt the flow of this. So they shake hands, say the nice thing, and then think of something they want to ask, and then ask it. And then they go, okay, well, then now I'm going to go. And then the person now interrupts and continues the conversation. And really, who started that? You did.
Yes.
And so we have to take some ownership that if we're in the middle of saying goodbye, we have to finish that. We can always follow up again. I mean, even like 30 minutes later, we can walk back over to them. You know, we can write them afterwards, tweet at them, text them. I mean, there's a zillion ways to stay in touch these days. You need to move on and then, you know, release yourself to see the rest of the room and them too. Like, you know, you're there to meet lots of people. I don't quite understand why people leave their house if it's not to meet people. Like, we can get content anywhere.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, anything you want to learn, you want to understand, dive into, it's available digitally.
I think the answer to your question, I personally think people get trapped into thinking, this is the mindset bit, that they're trapped into thinking, I'm a business owner or I'm a business professional of some kind. I must go to networking events. You know, this is what's expected of me.
Right.
This will either be good for my business or my professional role or whatever it is, without thinking about, is this the right thing for me to do? And is this the right? So before they've even got there, it's a non-starter. So in answer to your question, you know, yes, they could get that information and probably more effectively by sitting at their desks and not going to the networking event if that's all they wanted. They're failing to see the benefit of that because they see it as something that's imposed upon them, consciously or unconsciously.
Right. But when they realize that the effort it takes to leave their house should also equal the benefits of meeting people.
Absolutely.
Right. Like, to me, that's part of it. It's like, you know, if you're going to an event or a conference or seeing someone speak or something, there is a virtual way you could have done that. The reason you're going in person is because the people who are being convened, and that is as much of the reason for going as the content. The content has to be quality, right? There has to be usually a draw in that sense. But one thing I've learned over the years is that I now pay for very expensive conferences because the people who are attracted to those spaces are the people I want to meet. And so instead of going to lots of local things, I now invest in very large scale, national, international events because it's a different caliber of people who choose to spend their time in those spaces. And so you can even be selective in that sense of where do you network.
And presumably, if you're going to pay a larger amount of money, or indeed even if you're not, by doing a bit of homework beforehand, you'll know the sort of people that it attracts. You can ask in advance of the sort of people that go to these sort of events, and so that you are very clear that investment of time, effort, energy, whatever it is, or a combination of all of those things, is going to be beneficial to you as you see it, beneficial by your standards. In your case. So we've talked about the strategic aspects, the mindset, which we keep coming back to inevitably. We've talked about the effectiveness. Now let's talk about the inclusiveness a little bit more. Let's explore your croissant versus bagels metaphor, because that is one of the key things when I talk to people about, particularly introverts, who really, really struggle to break into groups. And we are, human nature being what it is, 2 or 3 of us huddle, as you say, shoulder to shoulder. And rarely do people open up when someone approaches. And I don't know whether I don't think I was even consciously taught that. Maybe it was just the way one's brought up. I don't know. I really don't know, because I was talking about this to somebody just the other day. Well, just before I read your book, interestingly enough, I was at a networking event where I'm going to be speaking quite shortly. And they offered for me to come along and just see the group and get to know the people, etc. in advance, which I did. And I happened to be talking to a group of people, and somebody came along. Now, I've never met any of these individuals, so I was the unknown quantity, if you like, in this room. Some of them knew each other, and I just, because that's what I do, I became the croissant from becoming the bagel. I just turned around, I saw somebody coming towards us looking a little bit nervous, and I just sort of turned my shoulder. That was all I did, and said hello. And somebody afterwards said to me, I did 2 things that they picked me up on, not in a rude manner. They said they were surprised that I didn't know anybody in the room, and yet I I was engaging with this individual who came towards us. And I had to think about it. And I thought, it was second nature. It didn't occur to me. So obviously I'm a croissant in your term. And I didn't even know it. But also that there was somebody doing the rounds in the room who I had sort of caught from the side of my eye, thrusting these blessed business cards, at everyone, and sort of almost clutching theirs back. And right towards the end, she came up to me and she sort of thrust hers into my face and said, "Can I have yours?" And I asked her, I said, "I don't wish to be rude, but I don't know you, and what do you do? I'd like to know a bit about you." And she started to tell me her story, and I explained that I was very happy to have her have my card because she'd actually asked for it, but that she should know that I'm not looking for those sort of services, etc. I was very polite about it because I don't see the point of not being polite, in those sort of situations. But I was trying to explain to her that actually I'm not sure that this conversation was going to really benefit her, and I also could see that a lot of people were very, very uncomfortable by her sort of thrusting. And she was quite taken aback because I don't think anybody had ever said, "Hang on, I'm not saying no, but maybe we should just explore why."
Yeah.
So say a bit about that from your
such good examples. Wow. Yeah. Well, I think that the being inclusive part, there's so many different things I can say about it, but one is while there's a politically correct reason for inclusiveness, I want to make the argument that it's actually more about being effective. That actually, if we recognize that we live in a world full of very diverse people of many different backgrounds and experiences, and that if we stay only within our closest network of people who look like us, have the same experiences and history as us, then our network will not help us in the ways we need it to. And that the innovation comes from the edges of our network, right? The weakest ties, as Malcolm Gladwell would say. So I think in that sense, if we recognize that having a diverse network, which is the book I'm working on next, is called Diversify Your Network. So I think about this a lot.
Perfect.
Then I think that we recognize that we have to not just be attracted to and speak to the people who look like us in a room, but we actually have to actively seek out the people who maybe on the face of it wouldn't have a shared experience, that we then have to be effective in what we do next. That if we approach people and say the first curious question that comes to mind about their appearance, then they're going to be pretty off-put, and it's going to be quite the opposite of helping them feel welcome to a room. It's going to make them think like, I don't belong here, and that person's really kind of rude or ignorant or whatever. And that we fall into this all the time. I mean, the really sort of common but not too overarching thing that I've heard people do is like, "Wow, you're tall, how tall are you?" I mean, like, it's like right, in the world of diversity, it's a kind of a silly thing, but it's the person who's tall, it's like really annoying. I actually know
it's never going to happen to me because I'm one of the closest people going.
So it'll happen the other way around then. So I actually know a 17-year-old who's 6'7", and when people start to ask him this question, he pulls out a business card and it says 6'7", no, I don't play basketball. And I just think that if the rote conversation can be printed on a business card, then you're not endearing yourself to this person. And so whether it's height or hair texture or skin color or accent or, a physical feature or disability or like anything that we ask simply out of curiosity. Now, there's a difference in like if I was getting to meet someone and their accent reminded me of a place that I visited or have lived, and I'm like, let's say I'm in the Eastern U.S. If I meet someone from Montreal, I might say, "Oh my gosh, I love Montreal. I haven't been in so many years. Like, I went there for a festival. I was back there a couple of years ago for something else. Like, it's beautiful there." Like we would be having a conversation about a shared experience.
Yeah.
An uncommon commonality is like another way of thinking about it. But if I merely say, "Where are you from?" I hear your accent. "Oh, thanks." Like, thanks for letting me know that that's where you're from. Like, that's just not that's not helpful. And so I think of that as sort of, what would it help? How could we help the person who comes in sort of be more in the space? So one way of thinking of this is being a host. So what you did naturally is that you were a host, that even though you were there as a first timer, you have it like in you. It's like hard to turn off. Like once you have this awareness, you realize there are other people in the room that are like, even though you were new, you have the skills to engage. And so you felt comfortable pretty quickly. And then you see someone who clearly looks less comfortable, even if they've been coming a lot, like you don't know, but then you're naturally going to turn and make space for them. So that's like the instinct. And one thing I've realized, because this is what I train people when I do these sessions, is that it's a leadership skill that once, even if you're shy and or you're an introvert, and I want to separate those out for a second because, you know, my wife's a shy extrovert.
Yeah.
And I've also dated outgoing introverts, and I mean, these are very different scales. So, and often they're mistaken for each other. So like, just because you're shy doesn't mean you're an introvert. It just means that in a social setting, it takes you a little longer to warm up, right?
Absolutely.
And so if you're the type who's often a wallflower, you might still be energized by being around people, or you might be drained. Like that's about energy, and that's about the introversion, extroversion. So I just think it's about, if you have the ability to be in that space and engage with people, then you host in a way. And particularly if you become a regular and you know some other people, I think that would really help as well. So in my book, I even go into details of like, how do you communicate across difference? You know, people are deaf or blind, or, you know, can't stand for long periods of time, like, or sitting in a wheelchair, like whatever the space is. Because like, again, if we're going to be effective in building out a diverse network, we need to have a way of having a conversation that does not alienate people or otherize them, but actually helps them feel part of something, and recognize that we've had moments ourselves of feeling like the odd one out, that the feeling of loneliness is not other people's issue. It's actually ones that we have experienced ourselves.
Couldn't agree more. And what's very interesting from what you've just said at the start of that was that you talked about, you know, us really honing into people that are like us, whether it's in what we like, how we dress, you know, whatever our preferences are. So if we're going to be going to these events and we're going to expand our network, we have to make quite a conscious effort to break away from that human nature and behavior, you know, learned behavior that we have of constantly going towards sort of people that we associate with, to start expanding that. But that's a conscious decision that you make, just as you make in terms of planning. This is yet another conscious decision that you're making when you're there to start to expand that and start to talk and start building relationships with sort of some very different people that you, in other walks of life, maybe you wouldn't do. You know, you wouldn't normally gravitate towards those individuals.
That's the magic. I always think that if you're able to go to events where you see people like yourself and meet people you otherwise wouldn't ever have, that's the magic. If you can keep finding those kinds of spaces where there's enough people like you to feel like you have some people that you can easily gravitate towards, but that you have the opportunity and you do reach out to people that maybe in ordinary walks of life you wouldn't have, those spaces are so rich. And, you know, you could be the host who actually organizes those kinds of spaces, or you can be the host who arrives at someone else's event and helps create that space and nurture it as well.
Absolutely. Okay, so now let's talk about you personally and how you've overcome some of these issues, because it's always interesting to hear what strategies you've employed, given you've been talking about this and being part of this process for a very long time, 10 years plus, you said. So what's one of your most awkward or embarrassing moments at a networking event, would you say?
Well,
and
so
how have you overcome that?
Yeah, so I use humor a lot, like, to overcome. I mean, sometimes the awkwardness is like someone like approaching me and saying the curious question, or being very pushy and salesy, and I'm like not willing to kind of just play along. But I sort of use some humor to deflect that. And, you know, if they're honing in on a difference, you know, I might point out that Google is a great resource. And if they're being very pushy, I'll ask them in a very serious tone, like, oh, so has this been really effective? Because I'm trying to learn better networking strategies. Like, what are your tips for that? You know, like, and I'll get them to, you know, and this is the same
level of sarcasm.
So yeah, and these are the same people who like take my card, even though I pretty clear that I'm not interested, and then add me to an email list that is
No,
clearly not personalized,
no.
and then get annoyed when I point that out to them. So, but I try to engage and use some humor, and I always point out to people that like that's not going to work for everybody. If you're not funny, you should know it.
No.
See, and like, I can say that like
Yeah.
because it's funny, but some people couldn't get away with that. So like,
Absolutely.
just know. So I definitely use humor to kind of to deflect, and I also don't take things personally. So I think about whatever it's going on. It's about what's going on for that person. So if they're being warm and receptive, like I'm trying to support that. If they're being like odd and pushy and or whatever, then it's like, wow, okay, it's not going to be about me. I'm not going to stay here forever. I'm going to be able to get like step away. And I just trust that about myself. But I also don't take their oddness to heart to
Yeah.
mean something about me, because if they're having a bad day, they're having a bad day, right? It's like we've
Very
had
good.
those moments ourselves. And, you know, that's one of the other moments where it's important to wrap up is if you find yourself distracted and unable to like laugh appropriately at all the funny stories this person's telling, and ordinarily you would, you know, it's not doing you a favor to stay because you're not able to be present for this person. So that's
And it
one
feels
of
very
those moments.
strange, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It feels awkward and strained at that point. So yes, definitely your 3Gs of grin. Oh no, sorry, grin and go
Yeah.
would be very appropriate at this point,
Yeah.
I think. Absolutely. So tell me, let's myth some busts, or bust some myths even. Tell me, what do you think is the number one myth about relationships at networking events?
Well, I think, like I said earlier, this idea that you're going to meet someone and make a deal. I think that's one. I think another is that you can walk in. I mean, like I said, planning is really important, but I want to mention that you should not plan to the point where you don't participate in the space, where you become the person who's really pushy, right? So you want to have a clear sense of purpose, but you don't want to then ignore all other social etiquette in order to get your point across. And I think, you know, that's another myth. It's like that your elevator pitch happens as soon as you shake someone's hand while you're still shaking their hand. And I guess another myth that I want to bust is that business cards are so like overdone and we don't need them anymore. Again, like, you know, different people have different systems, but if everybody forgot them, like I think people are like, well, it's okay, I'll just take yours. I'm like, well, what if the other person doesn't have one?
Yeah.
You know, like you're relying on other people having a resource and a tool that you aren't willing to have yourself.
Yeah.
So at some point that's going to stop being effective as well. So I just think, you know, and that networking has to be transactional is a myth that I want to bust, that it's not about that at all. And I have such an abundant mindset and like live in that way. And it is really, it's like, as you build that and as you do that, it really becomes a reality, like of how people then offer. And in one brief description is it's sort of like becoming known as the person who gives rides to the airport, right? And you're just the kind of generous person who does that for their friends and people who they know and care about. If you then need a ride, you're going to get one. And what's interesting is the person who offers to drive you may not themselves have ever benefited from a ride, but they know you to be the kind of person who does that. So if you give in that way in your business community, in your home life, right?
Absolutely.
In any space that you're in, if you're the kind of person who does that, who shows up and actually follows through, then people are going to want to support you when it's time to support you. And I think that was, you know, the lesson for me, and it's just like always showing up in that way.
Absolutely. And what you said earlier was very much about the balance as well. The balance between having business cards, not having business cards, the balance between how you approach people. You know, the whole thing is about balance in the way you approach it. Okay, so what about the most surprising thing you've learnt on your journey over these last 10 years? If there was one thing I had to pin you down to.
Well, you know, it actually helped me understand along the way that we all have felt like a unicorn. And by that, what I mean is like, wow, a unicorn. I've never met a unicorn. Hey, what's it like to, you know, followed by lots of curious questions, and that's not unique. That's not actually a thing that only I've experienced, right? It's not a thing that only people who look a certain way have experienced. It's something that we've all experienced. And so some of us live in spaces where we look more or less like the other people in the room. So maybe it doesn't happen as frequently, but we might still walk into that space. It's sort of like if you're a geek and you're really geeking out on like something, and then you can't find your people, even though you all look alike, none of them are your people. Like you're like, I'm really trying to find someone about this. It's like even in that space where it looks like everyone's the same, there's still differences. And when I started to appreciate that as being true, it changed for me how I felt about being different in the moments that I felt different, because it no longer was about me. It was about something we all experience pretty universally. And so I'm an out trans guy. And so for me, like I've had those moments of feeling like, different, or having people ask me curious questions upon meeting me and hearing that. And it's just like, that's the Google, like, go ahead, part. But I don't think it's about me. It's about we as a common thing. This is something we all worry about, like the idea of walking in a room and feeling like everyone else is best friends and you don't know anyone. Like that feeling of not fitting in is pretty universal. And it was once I accepted that it wasn't that I had to be shy to feel left out. It wasn't that I had to be an introvert to feel like I didn't belong. It was that actually pretty universally, we worry about whether or not that's happening.
Yeah.
We blow it up in our heads that it is happening. And that ultimately we always want to find our people. And from there we can expand our network. But we have to kind of feel centered.
Yeah.
And once I realized that, it sort of changes how I am and how open I am, because I trust that others will get it, and it's just very different. So that was something that 10 years ago, I don't think I understood. Now I just sort of believe.
Back to mindset, believing it.
Yeah, sure.
Not just knowing it, but believing it.
Yeah.
What a difference that makes. Absolutely. And then finally, your number one tip for listeners who are perhaps sitting there thinking, okay, he's given me quite a few strategies. Now, what's the number one tip you want to give them about networking or relationship building at networking?
I actually am going to go back to when I said earlier about writing the follow-up email before you go to the event.
I love
because
that.
I really think if you practice that, it kind of makes all the other things fall into place.
Mm-hmm.
And I will follow up by saying also that croissants versus bagels, the way it kind of works is that you won't be thinking about the event. You'll show up. You won't have done any pre-planning. And you'll start to think, well, where should I stand? And the idea of croissants versus bagels will pop in your head. And you'll scan the floor looking for openings. And then it'll start you thinking, well, wait a second. Who do I want to meet? Why am I here? And so even if you didn't do all the pre-planning, like having that moment as you enter the room can in itself just like center you and help you be more purposeful in that space. So that while the metaphor is, about openness, it's also about planning, because it helps you have that planning moment. So I think if you can do it in advance, all the more for you. That's great. If you miss the opportunity to do it, you haven't missed it entirely. You can just take a moment and like run through it in your head and make that into a practice and kind of
and salvage it. Yeah, even if you haven't done the pre-work.
Mm-hmm.
Robbie, there have been some wonderful, wonderful insights from you today. I want to just flag up some takeaways that I've got from this for the listeners, and a few that I've captured are very much around being strategic in our connections and recognizing that connections come from in different shapes and forms, and being open to those possibilities. That's what you've been advocating. And when we do that, we also allow ourselves to think about maximizing our return on investment if we go in with that view in mind. What I also loved was the point you made about making sure that you go in with the right mindset around whether you're being, and recognizing whether you're being transactional or whether you're actually going in with an offering. Your point about, C-suite individuals being much more in the offer mode rather than the transactional mode. I absolutely love the etiquette around exiting with grace and the 3 Gs of grin. Right, I'm determined to say grin first, but grip, grin, and go. Grip, grin, and go. I'm going to employ that at every opportunity. The grip, grin, and go. And finally, the point you made, which I think is a fantastic strategy of pre-writing your drafts, which help you not only in helping you to think through what it is that you want out of those sessions, but having them ready as part of your follow-up. Some wonderful tips there. Thank you so much, Robbie, for those.
You're welcome.
Now, before we end, Robbie has very kindly agreed to put together a gift for all the listeners, and it's his valuable 10 tips for conference connections, which you can download from robbiesamuels.com/BGM. So that's robbiesamuels.com/BGM. And we will be posting that link at the end for the show notes as well. So before we wrap up today, Robbie, do you have any final words you want to share with the listeners?
No, I really appreciate that summary. I'm excited to re-listen to this just for the summary alone. That was wonderful. It's hard to gather all the content and distill it down like that. So thank you for doing that. And thank your listeners for spending the time with us. And I really encourage people to reach out. There's so many different ways I want to support and inspire people to do this work in the world and really just see the opportunities and connections and possibilities in the world around them every day and start to translate that into what networking could be. And it becomes just a part of our life. I think that's the magic of it. When it stops being a chore that we do when we go to an event, it becomes just a way we live, then magic starts to happen.
And absolutely. And what I also wanted to say was, I said it at the beginning, I want to just reinforce it. If you get an opportunity, go and grab the book, Croissants versus Bagels, and also go and find out much more about Robbie from his website, as I said, robbiesamuels.com.
And so actually, can I just say that croissantsversusbagels.com is a direct link to the book.
Oh, so, even better.
Yeah, croissantsvsbagels.com.
There we go. Couldn't be easier. No excuse for not getting it. And it's well worth a read. It's a very easy read, full of really practical strategies, but, absolutely crammed with humor as well. As I said, I was guffawing with laughter when I was reading parts of it. So do go and explore some of Robbie's strategies as well. So all it remains for me to say is a huge thank you to you for being on the show today, for sharing your wonderful insights with us. And it's been a pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this week's podcast. Join us again next time when Hiru and her guests will help you to understand how to gain business mastery so that you too can develop a strong and sustainable business. In the meantime, you can find more information at growyourbusinesssuccessfully.net.